From Wakefield, it's the Nolan Carr Night Show, inviting you to join Nolan and his guest this week, Howard Helm, to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another amazing edition of the show. And as I just said, amazing edition, we have yet another amazing guest. This man is one of the greatest and most profound musicians, pianists, keyboardists, songwriters, theme song creators. He is a god at creating theme songs. With some of you may know a little known star called the Mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart. He's played in groups such as Zon, Refuge, with Ian Hunter and Mark Ronson, and so many other great musicians. I am pleased and honored to have the Howard Helm all the way up from the Pacific Northwest on the show this week. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for asking.
Of course, that's the least I can do in terms of music. And now music is sort of being able to be enjoyed as it once was after craziness. So for you, musically, what's it like? And in terms of not just maybe in your own studio, but playing music as well now, 3 years later.
The business has changed a lot, in the last little while, and certainly more than anything, it's the way that music is made. That's the thing that's a little bit unusual. I mean, when because I've been doing this a very long time, when I started in Zon, which was a band that was put together in the mid 70s, I mean, when you went into a recording studio to record, I mean, there was only one way of doing it. It
Sure.
went to tape, you know what I mean? And it was one of those things because of what you could do with overdubbing with tape and the rest of it. A lot of times you had to get a perfect performance or as perfect as you wanted it at some point. In other words, you either get it, if you get it the first time, well, it's a miracle. Everybody says hallelujah. But it's like, if it takes you 14 times to get it, well, it takes you 14 times to get it, because the technology today allows you so quickly to go in and change anything, overdub anything.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I've got a composition I'm working on now for an album that I'd spent a reasonable amount of time on. I've sort of decided after listening to it for a little bit that, the chorus of the song, it's not making it for me. It's like, so I've got to change it. So it's so funny. I'm listening to the original track and all the rest of it. When it comes time for me to, change that section that I don't like, well, all I'm going to do is zero in on that section. You know what I mean? And just do whatever I'm going to do. And then the whole thing will be done.
Yeah.
In the old days, it could never be done that way. If something had to be changed, it meant you went back to zero, and everybody in the band, same thing, trying to get it, recorded that way. So, it's, and with all the tools available with computers and stuff today too, there's a lot of people that are creative that aren't necessarily musicians.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That are able to take all kinds of, pre-recorded things and stuff like that, little loops of things and that, I mean, the entire rap industry
Sure.
is obviously, that's what's going on there. And it's funny. It's not, that just was never my favorite. I worked, in the midst of all of what's going on here. Before I came out here, I was 21 years at More Sound Recording in Tampa, Florida. And it was a major studio. It was a commercial studio. We did a lot of stuff for everybody, I mean, it could be private clients, but it was record companies, it was TV networks, radio stuff, we did everything there. And it really evolved a lot. The nice thing about it was at the very, very beginning, for instance, of computers coming into being used in recording studios. Well, I was there when it started. I mean, I remember going in when at first I thought it was crazy. I'm like, a computer? What the heck am I going to do with a computer, right? And, but, the thing is that you end up with, I went and bought one of those little classic Mac, I can't call it a mini because there is a Mac mini, but it's like a little tiny thing, had a little tiny screen on it. You put a floppy disk in. And I had a friend of mine who had started using it, and he started showing me some of the things he was doing. And I thought, well, that seems pretty cool. Like, boy, that's going to speed the process up and stuff like that, So it's, I've been very lucky that my career everything's evolved as the technology's evolved. And that's one of the things that you got to be careful. I will run into some older players these days who, they made a big mistake by not keeping up with technology, because they're kind of in a, their reference point is a lot of years ago, and that's not the way we do things now.
Sure.
And it's like, it can put you in a tough place, but it's thrown an awful lot of people, I would say, into the swimming pool.
Sure.
And like I said, what used to be something that was a domain where it was only musicians that were in there paddling around, you got a lot of other people now that are coming in and doing things, and some of them are fabulous.
Sure.
Some of them are not. Some of them have no training, have no idea, and yet they can go. Keyboard's a perfect example. You put your finger on something and something's gonna play, and then whatever, you make a vocal up over it, and the next thing you know, that's a record.
Yeah.
All the Zon records, took probably a couple of months to record.
Sure.
Refugee too. The second Refugee album we did up at Le Studio, which is the big studio north of Montreal. That's where Rush had done so many of their things, and there was a lot of big artists who were, the Police had recorded there, all sorts of things, and so, it was really, I still think it took at least about 6 weeks to get an album recorded. Now it's like, well, when I was working for the WCW, give you an example, one of the things, besides obviously the connection with Jimmy, who I met Jimmy at Morrisound. It was really funny. The first time I went there, it's funny. I had moved to Florida when I was playing with Ian and Mick, and because we were all over the world, so it really didn't matter a hoot where anybody lived.
Yeah.
And so at the time, my ex-wife was from Florida, and so, she just said, well, if we have a choice here, considering winter was coming in Toronto, she said, why don't, is it okay if we just set up shop down there? So that's what I did, and I worked there. I was there, I should say, for 4 years before I ever really worked in Florida at all. Yeah. I got a guy call me, and a guitar player that was working with Robbie Steinhardt, the violin player from Kansas, and they were doing a new album together. And he said, hey, will you play keys on it? I said, of course. And that's how I met the two Morris brothers when I went to Morrisound. They were recording there, and I walked in and had my setup and with the rest of it, and they looked at me and went, who the heck are you? We've never seen you before. And I said, well, no, you haven't, because I kind of work in a different thing. Anyway, we had a great conversation. They were looking for somebody to come in and just be. I had what was like an offline room in the studio. There were two large studios, one large enough for an orchestra. One really large room, and then a smaller room that could be done just for some cutting and that. But they both had SSL consoles in them. This is a multi-million-dollar studio. And my room was across the hall from that. It was an offline room. And in this way, people who, I worked a lot with songwriters, people who come in with ideas, they didn't want to be spending as much an hour doing it in the main recording room. So they'd come across and work with me, and we would flesh out some ideas. And anything we did in my room, my office, we could take across the hall and expand on the productions of that. Well, when I was first getting set up shop there, I started there in 1993, and across the hall in the B studio, there was lots of noise and stuff going on. I'm kind of one, and then all of a sudden I see Hulk Hogan come walking out of the door, and I'm like, holy mackerel! I said, of course I knew who he was, and I'm thinking, look at the size of him. I'm thinking, I never really quite grasped it. You know what I mean? Until I was like standing in front of him, and I'm like looking up going, hi, Hulk. Anyway, he was working on what was called the Wrestling Boot Band album. And at some point way, way, way back, probably when he was a teenager, believe it or not, Hulk, who everybody knows his real name's Terry, he was a bass player. Yeah. He used to play bass in some bands around the Tampa area. And so he had this whole idea of putting it together. And I didn't know anything about it. And there was a guy that Jimmy had been doing stuff before with the well, there's been so many names of it now, but WWF, and then the all that stuff that. But I can't remember where he lived, but he was somewhere out of town, anyways. Again, and they were working on this thing, and Jimmy came out one day, and he sees me, and he comes across, and he's like, "Hey, who are you?" And blah blah blah. And I kind of talked to him and explained some things. He goes, "Wow," and I guess he went and thought about it, and so he kind of gave me a little test. He said, "Hey, would you like to do? Would you maybe be interested in doing some music with me?" And I said, "Sure, of course." And so he came in, and he had an idea, and it was really funny. It's like the work we did, you know what I mean, getting going on that started. I mean, it started along, it was, well, let's see, what would it be exactly? 8 years of us doing stuff together, you know what I mean? And another thing, one of the things being a keyboard player and having all the different experiences that I have had playing, doing the wrestling themes was not that difficult for me, because generally all that you would ever get from the wrestlers would just be a suggestion of a kind of a song.
Sure.
They all have this idea of, what they want to come out to. And some guys, got really elaborate with it. And some guys didn't. Some guys just said, "Hey, whatever, do a thing, and the rest of it." And, a perfect example of something that came together really quickly and it was, again, what saved me with Turner Television, who was producing the show, on TNT and TBS. They could phone me and say, "We got to have such and such."
Sure.
And I mean, it could happen as much as like I could have a phone call on a Sunday and they want that darn piece of music ready to go to the truck on Monday night.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, it worked out okay, because with Jimmy living in Tampa, of course, he was constantly wherever the broadcasts were, him, Hulk, everybody. There's a lot of the guys that live there. Way, way, way back, there used to be a gym next door to the studio, which a bunch of the wrestlers used to work out at. So they kind of knew the area. Now, I didn't know a lot of this, but it was great learning it, and I can't say enough positive things about Jimmy Hart. I mean, he's just he's a great guy to work with. He'd give you the shirt off his back. He just, and also very talented, when it comes to, his musical ideas and that. I mean, back in the 60s, he was a lead singer in a band called the Gentrys, which had a #1 single, Keep On Dancing. I mean, a #1 single, that's a big deal, and because he's from Memphis, he was doing some reporting in some famous studios in Memphis and that. So it was really cool. But one of the things that came in, I hadn't been, you were mentioning the NWO, I hadn't been doing much stuff specifically for them. I've been when it was all said and done, I think Jimmy and I have 265 themes we did. I mean, it's ridiculous. And some of them were just, different versions of things and stuff like that. But I was really surprised when all of a sudden Jimmy came in one day and he goes, "Well," he says, "it was only a matter of time till we had to do." He says, "Well, we got to do a rap song, and we got to do it quick." And I'm like, "Really?" And so it turned out the day that he came in for that, I had been working with a client of mine in the studio, who, believe it or not, it was a rap client. I only ever had 2 guys that I work with on any regular basis. Just because there were some problems that had nothing to do with music or anything that seemed to be around a lot of the people that were working in a lot of the rap stuff that was coming out. I didn't feel comfortable. Quite honestly, my second client, I found out that, he missed a session at the studio one day. And I found out a few days later from somebody, he'd been shot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And unfortunately, that's not that weird a thing when you're dealing with the rap world. Anyways, where I'm going with this is all of a sudden it's like they want, we had to write the Wolf Pack.
Yeah.
And so it's like we came in and it's just, and so, Jimmy had some great ideas, keeping it really simple, just doing the piano thing. I mean, I thought, oh my God, this is really a thing. So we sort of were getting done with it. And he says, well, wow, we're going to have to get somebody to sing on this. He said that sounds right. I said, yeah. I said, it won't be you or me. And so we did. Anyways, sure enough, my client who I had worked with earlier in the day, I played a couple of things that he had done for Jimmy. He goes, his voice is perfect. And it was really, so I called him. I said, hey, come on over to the studio. I said, I got something for you to do. I said, heck, you might even make a few bucks. So he came over, and it was really funny. Just in physical appearance, he really looks a lot like Tupac, this guy. I mean, it really looks a lot like him. His name is actually LaQuince Henderson. And just a complete newbie. I mean, the stuff he was doing is the first stuff he'd ever done, putting any, raps together and stuff in the studio. He knew nothing about it. He knew a little bit about wrestling and stuff. He knew who Jimmy Hart was. He comes in, he goes, Howard, what's this? I said, well, here, we want you to do the rap on this song. He goes, oh, and he goes, and he said, well, is this going to be on television? And I said, if you do a good job, it's going to be on television. Yes. Anyway, it was so funny. Literally, we finished it up, got everything done. And it was within a day or two that Jimmy, took it over, let the guys in NWO, hear what was going on, and the producer, and they went, this is perfect. Hey, who's the great rapper? Who's the rapper you got? And it's like, some guy Howard knew, and so it was really funny. So he said, so he asked me, he said, well, am I gonna get like paid when when this thing's on TV and stuff? I said, no, not exactly. I said, you're gonna get paid for what he got paid for what he did that day.
Sure.
But I said, you have to sign a release because you're doing it. Jimmy and I wrote the song, and so there's nothing really there beyond your initial fee that you're going to receive for it. I said, but this could be a huge boon for your career. I said, every time that darn song is played on TV, and you got to figure between Mondays or Thursdays or whatever. I mean, that song was so played. I said, you can tell everybody you're the guy rapping the Wolfpack song. Sure. I said, that's going to go a long way for you.
Yeah. And it's still,
and it's funny because I did lose track of him. I don't know what happened with him, but I said, man, you just tell everybody, hey, turn on the TV. You're going to hear me rapping on a wrestling thing. So that was a lot of fun. That was a good thing. But yeah, it's like every the wrestlers that wanted to be involved. Oh my! Sometimes it was hilarious. I mean, Kurt Hennig, he was such a. I mean, when he did the rap is crap. I mean, when we did that was the craziest thing in the world. I mean, my God, trying to get Kurt Hennig to sing was like, oh man, I kept looking at Jimmy like he can't sing. And it's like, well, I just think it'll be funny to have his vocal on there. So we worked and worked with Kurt. We got it. He was a good guy. And oh man, we had so many crazy things. Jeff Jarrett, I mean, out back of the studio with acoustic guitars, smashing them on his chair. We had microphones set up on it, right? So that you could get the sound of it. And then the first time we did it, of course, you realize we're demoing a guitar as we're doing this, right? So we smashed the guitar. And I'm listening to it in the studio, and I'm going, I don't know. It doesn't really sound like a smashed guitar into my ear. I don't know what it should sound like, but that sounds wimpy. So we spent a chunk of time going through, finding different guitars, different sounds that we could break, and finally went, that's it. So, no, that was that was great for me to have that, that whole, experience. I think a lot of my old friends in Toronto were probably like, anybody who found out about it's like, yeah, can you believe this? Howard's doing music for WCW. So,
but they're still playing today. So
they're still playing today, and I get a lot of contact, Nolan, from these guys that I don't know what exactly they call themselves because they're really just collectors.
Sure.
But there's one guy I can think of as somebody's theme master or something like that. There's another guy I've speak to actually with some regularity who lives in England, and he's got an unbelievable wealth of stuff, and he some that actually got sold out there, I think, sort of as some bootleg stuff and the rest of it. I went through a lot of the stuff that he had and told him what I knew certain things were, and that was good. And then he actually some of the stuff, like I said, there was a couple things he had that I thought, how the heck did this guy ever get these? Because these were discs that I had created in Tampa,
wow.
and this guy's in England. How the heck did he get these discs? Because I'm looking at the disc going, shit, that's my handwriting. I'm like, so anyways, he was a very nice guy. He ended up sending the discs back to me. He said, I've got copies of them, which is what I wanted. I want the thing. He said, the disc doesn't necessarily do me any good. And it's not a commercial disc. As a matter of fact, as soon as you look at it, you'll probably get a good idea that this is a master disc coming out of the studio and not something that was printed for sale.
Sure.
And so, it's just, boy, there's just so many things that happen with those guys. And Jimmy tried to do a lot of things afterwards, a couple of the different wrestling companies and that, we did a few things, and in Florida, it was there's a lot of stuff around. But yeah, those were great times. I haven't talked to Jimmy for a while, but I did talk to him maybe a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
So he's still doing some stuff,
Yeah.
but he's slowing down. Jimmy's in
Sure.
his 70s now.
Sure, but it's still, if you still got the energy in the tank, that's all that matters. And I'll tell you this: the one song that I still listen to that you definitely had a role in is the Four Horsemen theme song.
Oh yes.
And whenever I need a little motivation to just, or I'm happy when I play, and I do a pretty good, Howard. I do a pretty good air guitar solo, like that song does. But and then at one point it was also Mr. Paul Orndorff's Mr. Wonderful theme song. That me and my dad played for about a few months straight, just laughing about. But it's still played to this day, and I'm sure yourself.
It's hilarious when we did that
back then.
That was one of the songs that absolutely for sure I was, smiling and laughing the whole time I was doing it in the studio. And with Wonderful, of course, you want to make it really bombastic.
Yeah.
Anything you can do to make it, have bigger flourish to it, the rest of it. So I love the Four Horsemen theme. I thought that was great. When Ultimate Warrior came back, I'm trying to think what his real name's Jim, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was really interesting. He was living in Arizona at the time. He flew to Tampa to supervise and go over the whole thing. And so that whole thing and it's got a whole thing at the beginning, where it's like a guy supposed to be like running through the jungle, and you hear the thing, and got the target in sight and all that stuff. And that was him. And we put that whole thing together. And then when it went into the song, the only thing that I ever used, just to show you how far programming's gone, the only thing that was an outside musician on any of the WCW themes would be a guitar player, because I'm not a guitar player. And the other one would be, depending on the situation, would be vocalists.
Sure.
Because, you can't, there's just no way you have to have a variety of vocalists. But I'll tell you what, it was really funny. I mean, actually the voice on Disco Fever is my wife. And I remember, one time we were doing something. I did, and I also did some stuff for the Nitro Girls. So I did have Kim came in once because she was sort of supervising things to look at some music. Of course, she was married to DDP.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was really funny. The guys in the studio, it's like all of a sudden, some of these, when she came in, there was definitely some notices. All I remember is she had a bad cold, and I did my best to keep away from her.
Yeah.
And then there was another time that Sable came in, and there was this really young intern. I mean, you know, he was late teens, maybe 20. And I had to go get something probably in the tape vault. So I walked around into the main office and was going into the thing. And he's like sitting there at the desk and he's like giddy. I'm going, man, what's going on with you? And he goes, oh, I just can't believe you're in there working with Sable. And I said, well, you know, and her husband, who was another wrestler. And it was like, and I said, well, you know, you know that I've been doing this for a long time. Then I turn and look on the table sitting in front of him. He's got the issue of Playboy that has Sable in it, right? And I'm looking at him going, dude, you got to put that away. Yeah. Like, that's just like, no. And I said, don't you even think about going and asking her to sign something. I said, because I'll kill you. I said, you just got to, you know, it was so funny. He just had this look on his face, like,
sure,
you know, like, and anyway, it was, we had great times doing all those themes. I was so disappointed when it came to a close, and it came to a close in a pretty quick and sort of hacksaw way of doing. I mean, they just wanted everything to do with WCW to be gone.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So, for instance, here's what happened with a lot of the themes. People kind of wondered, well, okay, WCW, like they put that stupid what do they call that thing? Mayhem CD out. Did you ever hear that?
No.
Okay. It was out in, I think, either 99 or 2000. Okay. It was supposed to be a WCW theme disc, which there was, I don't know why they weren't putting them out, but they weren't. Well, it was some backroom deal with this guy at this label in New York. So all these songs, they had 7 of Jimmy's and mine on there. And that was only to give the album legitimacy. Let's say the album had 20 cuts on it. All the cuts that were on it were B cuts from bands that this record company owned.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean? And they just literally, it was like, and the fans weren't fooled. I heard from some WCW fans that were really annoyed. And I say, well, you want to talk about really annoyed? I said, Jimmy and I are pretty annoyed because we didn't even get paid for it.
Oh, wow. And
I said, so that's adding insult to injury.
Sure.
It was a dog of an album. It was ridiculous. It was music nobody'd ever heard. Anybody, they'd say it was for a certain wrestler. People listen to it and go, that's not that wrestler's theme.
Yeah.
You know, like what a joke it was. Anyway, let me just tell you a quick little something that not a lot of people know, but people have said, well, why has the WCW music sort of been so buried? Like it just disappeared when the show went off the air, other than reruns. And of course, it took years and years for them to finally start using some of those wrestlers again.
Yeah.
And but let me tell you what they did when they bought the WCW, which was only for the purpose of closing it down.
Sure.
They bought the rights to all of the music, but they didn't buy the publishing.
Interesting.
From Turner. So what that means is now, if that music's going to go out there and be played on television, the two people that divide up anything musically out there is the publisher of the music and the writer of the music. Those are the two pieces of the pie, you know, that are out there. And of course, music can break down into lyrics and music. But for WCW, let's say the 99% of it was instrumental, or maybe using sound bites. You know what I mean? I remember doing some of the, you know, when we did the NWO album, geez, I had 3 or 4 DATs, an hour a piece, that had all these bits from the ring and that, you know, all these banter and stuff that had gone on. And I would slip little bits in here and there. Here's the reason why WCW did, or why WWE did that. By the publishing being kept with Turner, they knew damn well that they were never going to use that music, right? they didn't pay for the publishing. So Turner must have thought they got some kind of a deal or something, right? Well, they didn't, because what it did is, with the rights being assigned to WWE, what you've done is effectively put all that music in limbo.
Oh, wow.
You can't put it out.
Sure.
You can't put it out because Turner would get a chunk of it. Well, they're certainly not going to let that happen.
Yeah.
And I don't. So, and I never knew about this. I talked to the head music guys at WWE and stuff like that. I went through, sent them 4 discs of stuff of all of Jimmy's and my themes. I talked to them. I was under the impression they were going to do a whole thing, you know what I mean, to kind of, and it just never happened. I mean, quite honestly, for all the fun that it was, there was a lot of stuff they misled me and Jimmy about, you know what I mean? It's too bad, but it's the wrestling business.
Sure, yeah.
It's like working for a casino. You're going to expect that there's going to be some dubious business practices going on,
Yes.
But I'll tell you what, I loved it. And it was a great thing for me because I started doing that. I needed to get off the road. I'd been on the roads. I mean, I'd been on the road since I was like 17. And it was the year my first son was born. And so, me getting the gig at the studio, and then all of a sudden having the stuff with Jimmy and that, and I started producing some other stuff around there, and that it worked out really well, because I didn't want to be gone all the time when my kids were growing up.
Yeah.
And I lived out of a suitcase for a lot of years, and I enjoyed those years too. I'm very fortunate. I mean, I've got most of the bands I've played in, at least one person has passed away.
Wow.
Yeah, it's one of those realities as you get older, and sometimes it's because of some
recreational use,
bad behavior.
Yes.
Anyway, but that way I just so it was great for me. Like I said, I could turn around and go from something that would just be a piano thing and to that. But yeah, except for the guitar and some vocals, everything that was on those tracks is me.
Sure.
I programmed the drums. I played the bass on keyboard. So even some of the guitars actually were me too. But it was a lot of fun, And I'd been doing any of the guys that wanted the big orchestral sort of stuff. That was cool too. I'd actually done a movie soundtrack somewhere in there in the early years. Some of the characters. Randy Savage, he was so funny. Oh man, I'll tell you what, it would just you'd have to be on your guard. You know what I mean? When those guys came in, they were a hyper bunch.
whether they're intentionally filled with hyper or they're unintentionally filled with hyper, it's definitely.
I think they just live like that. I actually told people once, because somebody said to me, "So you've spent time with a whole bunch of these wrestlers, working on stuff for them," and I said, "Yeah," and they go like, "Well, what are they really like?" And I said, "Well," I said, "probably the most accurate way I could describe them," I said, "imagine they're like live cartoon characters."
Sure.
I mean, honestly, that's the way they are.
Sure.
I mean, it's some of it's an act when they're doing one of their, little dramas there to set up something for the ring. But I mean, you never see really any of those wrestlers just sort of sitting down looking like a regular guy.
Yeah.
I mean, they just don't do that. And Jimmy's that way. Oh my goodness. Sure. The way you see Jimmy, that is the way Jimmy is. He is moving at 1,000 miles an hour all the time. I mean, he used to be doing things. He'd be doing dancing, phone calls, writing. Oh man, it was, but that's why he had me.
Yeah. I want to sort of I'll go back to WWE eventually, but I sort of want to start from the beginning, because not just what you accomplished later in life was successful. Early on in your life, even in middle school and high school, you were vastly successful as well with stuff that I read about, which I found was interesting. Growing up, we all have these interests and stuff, sports, music, arts, whatever it may be, and yours was obviously music, but also because your mother was a piano instructor, keyboard instructor. For you,
and absolutely, and the thing is that I'm one of those people I fall into of trying to think. There's been a couple of famous guys that have said the same thing, but it's absolutely true. Billy Joel was one of them. I knew the night that I saw the Beatles on
Yeah.
Ed Sullivan, I knew. I said, "That's it. That's
Yeah.
what I'm going to do." And I mean, of course, my mom and my brother and sister and that probably thought crazy,
Yeah.
And then, of course, also it was, it was a little tricky at the time period because, when as it moved into when I was in school there, like, let's see, middle school is in the 60s. And then I went in high school beginning of the 70s. The big bands really per se were pretty much, there were a lot of power trios and stuff, you know what I mean? A lot of guitar based bands. There were organ players in some of the bands, but that was about it. As a keyboard player, there was no such thing as synthesizers yet. There was no such thing. There were some kinds of electric pianos, but boy, they really weren't very good. And they certainly didn't sound like a piano. So really, it's like you started out sort of being an organ player, and it was like, man, I remember that was a big deal. Yeah, I was a kid when I bought my first Hammond, and I bought it at you're in Toronto, right?
No, I'm in Rhode Island.
Oh, you're in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Well, then you wouldn't know anything about Toronto. Anyways, there was an organ store that was there. It was funny. It was the first time I saw a Mellotron was in there, and I wanted one badly. Never got one. I mean, my mom would look at me and go, "Where do you think the money's coming from for that?" Anyway, but I did get a Hammond organ, and that was it. I started playing. It's funny, Brian Miller and Zahn, he and I actually played together in two different bands in high school. And this is the whole thing, I say to people, it's like, talk about an amazing era to grow up in.
Yeah.
I mean, Rush played my high school.
Yeah.
They played a dance
and
at the high school.
You were practicing in the same
we practiced in the same practice hall. That was out in there was a little industrial complex out east of Toronto. And it was just, there was maybe 5 rooms that had been kind of in this industrial complex. And Rush basically owned one room that was at one end. They painted their name on the door and everything and the rest of it. And I mean, I heard those guys rehearsing before they released the first album.
Oh, wow.
I mean, Geddy's voice was really soft naturally. It was like John Anderson and Yes, that real pretty, he would go out in the hallway before rehearsals and scream and scream and scream. I mean, I'm not exaggerating here, Nolan, like 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
It's like, dude, do you have a voice left at all? And he'd be raspy. Then he would go in and they'd be rehearsing the stuff. And they used to do Zeppelin covers and stuff when they started. And it was one of the ways, because Geddy is one of the few guys who could sing Robert Plant. He didn't have a voice that sounded like Robert Plant, but nobody could sing Robert Plant because of the range it was. And so the fact that he could sing it, that went a long way for them. And that, of course, was with their old drummer, John Rutsey. And I'll tell you what an amazing, magical time to grow up in Toronto. There were, I mean, all through the 70s. I mean, I spent probably every night or every other night finding a way to get downtown and just check out stuff. There had to be 25 clubs.
Oh, wow.
I mean, and the people that were in there that were playing, it was funny. I just saw a thing. Actually, one of my sons just saw, who did they see? Somebody, two of my sons still live in Florida. They just saw the Winery Dogs with Billy Sheehan. And it's funny. I remember seeing the Billy Sheehan playing in the Gasworks in Toronto with a band called Talus from Rochester. And he was amazing then. And they were one of the loudest bands I'd ever heard. And it was just, but then, it's like, there's been some people that have, that went through there. You know what I mean? It was just, it was fabulous. I was very, very blessed. When Zahn started, I mean, I was, well, for all intents and purposes, I was right out of high school, probably.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the other guys in the band were older than me. And the only ones that ended up through all incarnations was the singer, Denton Young, and I. In fact, I just talked to him a day or two ago because there's a label in England called Rock Candy that's just about to release Zon's second album. They've already re-released the first album, and I sent them some tracks for them to put on there, including one unreleased one. And I've sent them some stuff for this second one. So I'm looking forward to it. They're going to remaster everything. I'm pretty sure the third Zon album will never see the light of day. That's just a long story. That there's a bunch of bootlegs out there now, but nobody has a master or nobody has a copy that was made from the master that's not vinyl. Because the record company that was done with, which was not a major label, somehow in the years after that, if you can believe this, they erased the master tapes of our third album.
Terrible.
I mean, I was speechless when I heard. I looked at, it was actually our guitar player, Brian, who told me. And I looked at him, I'm like, what? I said, who erases master tapes?
Sure.
I said, I mean, I can see, maybe the session tapes, you know what I mean? They needed, 2-inch tapes expensive. Maybe they needed to, here's some outtakes of Zon on a 2-inch tape. We can erase over that. But to erase the master tape, it was just shocking. So, but anyway, we had a lot of, that was a good old time in the 70s there, and that went. And then I did a few, when Zon broke up, I did a couple of things around, but then I ended up joining Refugee. We had the same management is how that happened. That was a good situation that went, but there were issues there that the singer who's passed away now, we'll just kind of leave all the stories that have to do with that alone because he's passed away. I don't feel very comfortable kind of painting pictures of people who have passed that are not good, but there were issues. And anyways, I was very, very fortunate again that after the second Refugee album had come out on Polygram, we'd done a whole bunch of touring and the rest of it. I got back to Toronto. I got a phone call from a buddy of mine who said, "Hey, Ian Hunter and Mick Ronson are looking for a keyboard player. Do you want to do it?" And this was weird. I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? Do I want to do it?" I said, there's got to be an audition or something. He goes, No. It's like, and this was a really good friend of mine. He was the sound man and the road manager for Ian Hunter. And so he said, no. He said, "Believe me, Ian trusts me." He says, "If I tell Ian I got the right keyboard player for him, there'll be no more discussion. You don't have to worry about it." And I said, wow. And that's exactly what happened. Next thing I knew, I'm in my, actually at that time, I was living in my sister's house in the west end of Toronto. And I remember getting a phone call one day, and I'm in my little basement apartment, and it's Ian Hunter on the phone. And we're talking away about music. He sends me tapes of stuff. He says, "Okay, rehearsals are starting here." And
there you go.
That was amazing because I was with that group. I was with almost 4 years. And the only reason that didn't continue, like I said, is because Mick got really sick, and he passed away in '93. Same around the time Freddie Mercury passed.
Yeah.
Because the guys in, like, Ian's old band was Mott the Hoople, and of course Mick Ronson had played with was Bowie's guitar player. So they were all really close friends with the guys in Queen.
Yeah.
They had all, in fact, I didn't even know this, but way, way back, there were actually a couple of gigs that Queen opened for Mott the Hoople.
Oh, wow.
And in England, it's a very different kind of an attitude in the business than it is in America. In America, it's, what have you done for me lately? What's your latest hit?
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. If you don't have something current, they don't, whatever. It's like you got to be always on them. In England, they never, the whole, say, music industry, there's kind of a hierarchy that they remember. You know what I mean? Like, I saw it firsthand so many times, but specifically because I was talking with the Queen guys, the last gig we played in London, both Roger Taylor and Brian May came to the gig. and Brian played with us. And it was like, you could tell the respect they had for Ian.
Yeah.
And you know why? Only because Ian Hunter has never had a record that sold anywhere near what a Queen record sold.
Yeah.
But he was really well known. He was in the culture, and he was there before the guys in Queen. So the guys in Queen respect that.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't respect the guys in Led Zeppelin just because they're a really good band. You respect them because, well, Led Zeppelin got there before you. You know, they recorded their first record in 1968, and you didn't record your first one until whatever, 1972. Yeah. So, and they really do maintain that. It's something I wish was a little more prevalent here. You know, musicians in general in Europe and you know, in the UK and that, I just find over there they're treated with a little bit more respect.
Sure. And the fans appreciate the music more. I know with my favorite group ever, the Beach Boys, in America, a lot of their albums were either the fans liked it or the critics didn't like it, and vice versa. Whereas over in England, they really loved their music more, and Pet Sounds is a prime example of that.